the idea was that we consider that there are some common aspects that are some relevance between the topics of the interest of this particular course and the topic of the workshop, which are worth to be discussed here. The title of the course is Topics in Urban Design, can be maybe translated in English, and the scope is that it is trying to relate some theoretical discussions about cities, urban development, social and economic aspects of cities with the practice of urban planning and urban design. And in the last years, the course is focusing more on the aspect of the urban crisis, and in the center of Athens, which is where also the school is located, and which is a terrain that experiences very strongly the symptoms of the crisis. So I would relate it with the theme of the workshop. I think that we don't have a particular reference to the theme of urban austerity, but we may help to address the question of what type of urban crisis is happening in Athens, and how does this crisis differ maybe from what is happening in other cities. And I think a very good starting point is that is related with the core of the course is not to start with a given definition or to take something for granted regarding the study and planning of urban space, and the definition of urban design as a discipline or as a practice, as a scientific, let's say, domain, but rather to question that, acknowledging that in the last decade at least, this term has been used to explain very different type of interventions with different goals in different scales, and rather we are starting from this point, acknowledging this fact, and we are asking the students to make their own, let's say, interpretations of associations of meanings, and trying to link the discussions, the theoretical discussions, with explorations in the field. We think that this is a policy that helps to relate Athens with broader discussions, and also to reveal the particularities, let's say, that every city has in this discussion. So I think that in this sense we are very interested in this discussion that is taking place today. Another element that I think is worth pointing out is regarding the methodologies that we use. We apply a methodology of seminars in the course, which is a way of mobilizing the students to organize themselves and associate their work with the work of their colleagues. And this is part of the course, let's say, as an exercise that all the students have to present topics together jointly. But in this year we took, let's say, an initiative with Maria Manduvalu, that is not present today, the Professor Maria Manduvalu, to invite them to present this work also outside let's say, the classroom, and to organize themselves to coordinate the survey from their field, from their course, let's say, work, into a group presentation. This has already been presented in a conference, and today you will we have the opportunity to see the results of this work, which they will present themselves.
The reason for this proposal was a recent discussion among students of course urban design issues of the postgraduate program of urban and land planning of our university. The content of our discussion was the retraction of distinguishable controversial risks of planning in the city of Athens today. The spectrum of ambiguous reflections that are mentioned aimed at identifying and showing rational and organizational failures of management and configuration of space as a social capacitor in the era of postmodern inhabitation of city today. The unbalancing prevailing reality has created the conditions to realize a combination of issues that at first glance seems unconnected to each other. That way there was formed an unified social and geographical platform of articulation of our thought and our speech. We lived at a period of time when the ideals of human rights have come to the forefront, both from a political and an ethical point of view. The concepts that prevail are mostly individualistic, and as such, they don't question the dominant neoliberal logic in any way. When Henri Lefebvre was writing about the right to the city in the late 60s, he would put it into the perspective of a different urban treaty, beyond the simple request for generalized accessibility to goods and services offered by the city. That's why he insisted on the emergency of the city as a result of collective creations. As a project, social change integrates all the individual rights and particularly the right to be fair. Everyone's right to not be classified into categories formed by the powers of capitalism, allowing social distinction and separation. Modern Marxist intellectuals, David Harvey among others, have designated the relationship between urbanization and capitalism in the past few years. In this context, defending the right to the city also means questioning the capitalistic control on the relationship between produced surplus value and urbanization, as well as rendering the possibility of democratization of the urban treaty itself. Claiming the authority to configure the continuous reconstruction of the cities, since nowadays public accessibility to the commons is everything but granted. The metropolis constituted an enormous common that is created collectively, and thus the right to use it should be granted at least to those who participate in this creation. The current condition in which urban space is produced or evolves mainly via planning, the right to the city is assured only to those that have the access to the design procedure. Design as a prescriptive tool of transforming the commons probably consists a condensed total of social practices which functions through the net of rules, forming thus a close self-related system, an institution. On the other hand, unofficial planning, emancipated through the absence of certainty, confronts itself as an internal solution to the problem, not a superficial one. In this case, products arise through the process of creation, ensuring the existence of the city project. The consideration of planning as a representative and prescriptive tool offers the spark of questioning the official design and searching for alternative, not mediated models of space production.
This section attempts to record the dominant trends of official urban planning that have been encouraged during the financial crisis as well as examining the tools and the type of language used to excite interest in order for these trends to become viable, allowing the potential to take root and ultimately produce a collective vision. At the same time, observing the process of developing official design, contradictions emerge which provoke the same questions every other time. Which spaces become the subjects of official urban planning, by whom and for what purpose? In this context and in this critical period, there is still room for united action, in which space can be claimed and shaped by the forces that produce it, rather than be accepted as a finished product. Two examples of contemporary urban reality in Athens begin the discussion, followed by comments about the language that connects them, the role they are required to play, the spaces they aim to shape, and the audiences they address to. According to the Rethink Athens competition statement, the city reoccupies public space, and Panepistimiou Street, transformed into a pedestrian walkway, will become a meeting place for citizens of all neighborhoods. It seems like we are moving into a new era. It seems that the economic, social, and humanitarian crisis is an opportunity for catharsis and progress. Anyhow, urban planning is an important tool for policy implementation. However, the reasons behind supporting urban initiatives vary according to political agendas. De Angelis says that the language used to support capitalistic policy that ultimately creates barriers is unclear and embellished. The language of enclosure must not represent itself as a negative force that separates, exerts violence, and weakens. It should instead represent a positive proposal, a vision for the future that makes sense on a number of specific subjects. Cracks have appeared in the foundation of the model of city organization, being influenced only through control of capital resources, and there is the possibility of change which would benefit the lower social classes and groups. This direction of Marxist criticism allows perspective on class-based approaches to city planning and the production of space, not spectacular or thematically based, but in response to the needs of the citizens. During the past few years, after the protest movements that have appeared spontaneously in Athens, a redefinition of the public space as a center of constitution of collectivities, as well as of a center of social awakening, can be observed. Meanwhile, however, as a response to this spontaneous outcome, a coordinated mobilization of the in-state, as well as of the exterior capital of the state and of the European mechanisms, and last but not least, of a multitude of private enterprises, using as their tool the strategic urban developments, had as its results the proposing of a series of spaces that could eventually act independently and function as basis for the management of potential exterior relationships that comprise of aims and eventually threats. A predominant space of such characteristics in Athens is not other than Panepistimiou Street, situated rather right in the central core of the city, which, as it was mentioned before, is now part of the great regeneration project of Rethink Athens. It's a project in which the characteristics of a typical visionary regeneration for the city can be easily traced, leaving though the basic question out of the equation. In times of socio-economic crisis, which often manifests itself in various manners, one wonders what is the role that an attractive passerby zone intended for tourists and visitors, that is a sterile enclave in an otherwise disorderly city center, seeks to play. Beyond the obvious benefits of the expansion of a permanent track mean of transportation, the tram, and the greenifying of the city center, who is going to use this project today, and what happens with the problems of the rest of the social groups of the city, especially of those characterized as unwanted and problematic, which inhabit the area just a few meters further in Piraeus Street. The above discussion is linked at a second level to the way that the official design at the time of crisis envisions areas which are transformed into attractive competing centers of specialized duties. A particular example is the Phaleron Bay, which is emerging as new centrality of a supralocal character within the metropolitan area of Athens, while setting up field stake for both the people's lives and the international promotion of the Mediterranean city as well. The current critical reality finds the area at a state of urgent intensive development. During the period of crisis, the potential benefits of the recovery bring interest and align the action by local operators and investors. More to the point, the National Opera seems to be a virtual architecture building of international scope and a sample of private initiative, while working as a totem that contributes to the creation of the new business world city identity. The vision presented to the user of the seafront attempts to link the spectacular picture and the imaginary ideal to the consumingly predetermined spatial experience. The scenery that is developed conspires to the eclipse of the public space and its mutation in a strictly controlled and marketable product. The above-mentioned scenery and the new standard of leisure is contradictory in relation to both the recruitment of the meaning of space, aesthetic values, collective and individual memory, and to those practices which allow specific social groups to assert and organize the public space as common.
Given that urban space has always constituted a political stake and premising an inherent dialectic between social and spatial relations, in the present section we will attempt to recapture the promoted and to some extent implemented in space predominant narration about the center of Athens. At the same time, we will attempt to highlight certain controversial aspects of the space strategies already mentioned, contradictions which mostly occur in everyday urban life. The sovereign power de facto holds the lead in the production of space. However, cities do not constitute an homogeneous field. Urban space gathers, highlights, and sometimes strengthens the aesthetic, moral, social, and cultural contracts and configurations. For these reasons, rephrasing the words of Hannah Arendt, the homogenizing phantasmagoria of the official plans will inevitably come into conflict with these subjects who choose to maintain objects' identity and its diverse facets, insisting on having a common world as a reference point. The urban space of the post-industrial metropolis is characterized by the spreading out of the individual working hours into the entire 24-hour day, while the constant presence of the new means of connectivity reinforces the new horizontality that takes place during the process of the production of physical or immaterial goods. In a period of maximized austerity measures and limited dispensable resources, the transition to a self-employment state of work is usually forced in pursuit of an alternate to unemployment in inadequate wages, physically or mentally tough working conditions. In Athens, co-working spaces, independent individuals of the same or related professional fields work using the available common infrastructure, following an idea that roots to Berlin of 1995. New co-working relations are being established based on trust, common way of thinking and value system, setting the issue of a new typology of space under discussion. Focusing on the west parts of a historic triangle of the center of Athens, the Impact Hub, parts of a global network, and Romancho, the branch of the well-known Arts Across Media Center BIOS, are two of the newest entries of the field. However, in correlation with other initiatives, the creativity gap in the urban tissue, marked 1 year ago, seems to be gradually filling in. Apart from questions on viability and the social impact, these initiatives promote the discussion on who lives and works in the area, appears to be reinitiated with the city's mayor's appraisals. Gerani region at the center of Athens, official planning versus cohabitation. Gerani is a region on the southwest side of Omonia Square between Piraeus and Athena Street at the center of Athens. For decades now, the center of the city attracts different population groups, especially the disadvantaged ones, like immigrants, homeless, or drug addicts. Based on this fact, the dominant narration for Gerani region equates the immigrants with the criminals and accuses them for the degradation of the entire area. On this narration, the triptych of the Greek migration policy, which is characterized by the criminalization of migration, the rhetoric about the inviolated and populated center and the foreign invaders, along with the official urban planning such as the action plan for the center of Athens, is intertwined. This triptych is accompanied by repressive practices which take the reoccupation of the city as an emergency. On the other hand, the dynamic reality of everyday lives of the immigrant populations at the area is different, a fact confirmed by the field research. The existence of immigrant communities, social networks, and neighborhood relations such as meeting places, newspaper offices, worship places, and cafes of different ethnic groups is a fact. At the same time, the use of public space by immigrants, in relation with the fact that they work at local shops, Valvakios Market is a great example, or own small to medium businesses, strengthen the argument of the social cohabitation between local and migrants of the area. If the multicultural city is a feature of the current social organization, beyond the visionary goal of the researchers of space, the question arises, does the state encapsulate these aspects to the proposed design policies?
Newly introduced norms of habitation in the center of Athens question on issues of security in the neighborhoods of Metaxourgiou Keramikos. The enactment of new institutional and legal frameworks indicates the ways in which the market laws, especially in times of depression, attempt to define, in a holistic way, the everyday life in use of both public and private space. The state, only seemingly absent from this process of spatial transformation, maintains a leading role in the scheduled projects for development in central neighborhoods of the city of Athens, as in the case of Metaxourgiou Keramikos, where private investments have been included through the so-called fast-track procedure and derive additional funding from the European program JESSICA. The vision behind these urban interventions corresponds to a socially constructed and meanwhile commonly accepted belief, declaring that the city center is decadent and void, a place where iniquity, poverty, crime, violence have found their inaccessible space and field of action. Consequently, always according to this conception, given the current financial crisis, the city center is condemned to a continuous degradation unless special measures are taken. Thus, a new residential pattern, similar to the suburban ones, is promoted inside the city core, promising security and undisturbed normality, discharged from the threat of the intruding other. It is worth stressing out that these above-mentioned risk qualities and parameters are interestingly interconnected with all the features and comforts that compose a marketable lifestyle and a spatial product. Moreover, in this way, simplistic interpretations concerning the multiple and dynamic realities of the city are not only preserved and reproduced, but also are gaining ground and predominating, while everyday negotiation of space gets eliminated. The request for security and its commercialization lead to urban fragmentation. Meanwhile, neighborhood and community are no longer consisting of dynamic social relations, but committed through the regularization of a practice of moral control. About vandalism and other maladies. Studying the basic axis of dominant planning, it is easy to suppose that public space is violently transforming, creating at the same time a new space equality. In Athens of the Olympic Games, as well in Athens of crisis, many people in the public sphere support the need of a clean and organized public space. And this organization is demonstrated by very specific and clear representations. From the straight routes inside the under-surveillance metro stations to the elegant view of the buildings, and from the legislation of minimizing demonstrations in favor of the market to the castigation of seropositive women as source of contamination, dominant narration gives a new meaning to the public subject that will dwell the city. The questioning of these enacted and seated practices will be condensed from the Greek media in the definition of the vandal, offering a solid alibi for the transformation of the ideological frame inside the limits of which neoliberal planning is taking place. Indicating vandalism as one of the basic factors resulting in the degradation of public space, security becomes the cornerstone of social organization. This strategy of social control has its roots in zero-tolerance policy. It was implemented in the United States during the late 80s, and 1 decade later was transferred to the other side of the Atlantic. Under this aspect, public space shrinks, while private space seems to claim every inch of the public sphere through inclusion by absence of anything that confronts the dominant narration. However, in a time where Greek society is subject to violent transformations, how important can be the request for clean walls in civilized citizens?
In the last section of this presentation, we're going to discuss a little about practices and discussion that object to the dominant planning and dominant narration. Greece being an essential cell of spatial expression of the crisis we experienced the past years, comes face to face with the capital's primitive accumulation processes through new enclosures of commonwealth in terms of emergency economic regulations and the welfare state shrinking, transformations of the property regime, FAR ratios, urban planning regulations, and classification of monuments and forest areas are included in the daily agenda, implemented under questionable practices. But all these violent changes result in a series of social resistances that leave a clear spatial trace. The emerging urban social movements seek ways of responding to social issues, survival questions, but also spatial claiming, while the surviving tradition of political movements, such as the labor and the squash movement, charge them with political orientation. The center and neighborhoods of Athens are the core locus of the expression of all the above. Several social resistances and citizens' movements transcend the passive representation of the collapsing social structures and relations, forming a process of production of space that differs from the capitalistic. These movements are not necessarily expressed directly along the physical space of the city, whereas they cover a big spectrum of claims, from the overcoming of the dependencies on the public state to the desire of integration in it. First subject deals with the neighborhood of Exarchia. As you may have heard, it has a special character. The neighborhood of Exarchia is tangent to ancient city center, adjacent to its administrative and commercial kernel, densely populated with 22,000 inhabitants. Following similar processes of housing production with the rest of the city of Athens, where self-housing and the system of antiparochi were prevalent, its built environment mostly consists of low-cost housing, as we can see on the slide. This fact, in combination with Exarchia's neighboring to 4 historical university buildings, attracted a lot of students, artists and political activists, forming the particular character of the area. But Exarchia's clear identity was not formed until the early 80s, after the formation of the so-called out of the parliament leftism and the anarchist community that followed the fall of the military junta. Therefore, the population richness of Exarchia and the particular political circumstances created a fertile ground for the establishment of the area as the land of resistance and struggle, but also as a spatial asylum, apart from state and capital mediations, for all the undesirable social subjects, such as the homeless, immigrants, and drug addicts. We see some pictures of it on the slide. Today, the neighborhood of Exarchia, being the home of the weekend, is one of the most eloquent spatial narrators of the crisis, revealing in the daylight the dystopian daily life in the city of Athens. But at the same time, the area becomes once again the inland of struggle. The emerging alternative models of social and spatial organization through the complementary outcomes of both the action of several existing inhabitants, solidarity collectives, and its spatial traces, choreograph a struggling city urbanity. We see also some aspects of this in the last slide. In particular, the action of the Social Solidarity Network, the Social Health Clinic, and the Time Bank form an alternative sustainable network of social benefits and services, while the rich network of free social spaces of the area, such as Navarino Park and Samadou Garden, offer an opportunity to understand the new constructed urban flows. Next project we'll discuss about the expansion of urban social movements throughout Attiki, which is the bigger region around Athens. During the registration of claimable spaces of Attica, the central domestic regions of Athens municipals, Exarchia, Kypseli, Patisia, Academia Platonos, Petralion, Akoukaki, as well as numerous peripheral ones, such as Vironas, Kessarianis, Zografi, and Galatsi, present most of the resistances and claiming on matters of free space, common wealth, and common rights. This phenomenon reflects municipalities along with state's vision for reoccupying the center, this is a phrase used by the Prime Minister, as it's promoted by private interests. The process imposed on the cases of Agios Panteleimona Square and the municipal market of Kypseli, commencing with their incited abandonment and escalated with efforts of redesigning, represent a firm example of the combination of state's repression mechanism, control and marginalization of a severe amount of social groups from public space, in order to be transformed from places of leisure and collective expression into consumption ground. On the map we can see how the struggles for land have been expanding throughout Attica. Within the years, on the ongoing procedure of privatizing the remaining free spaces and violently repressing the resistance cells, apart from the further degeneration of the urban experience, the phenomenon of the internal conflict between the state and the citizens is constituted. On this map we can see some of the characteristics of these new urban social movements, such as the forming of autonomous public networks, self-organization, some forms of action like occupying, reforming or transforming public space, and some of them even with a clear anti-capitalistic aspect. Throughout these procedures, concepts such as the common possession, the public property, public and free space seem to reappear in the public discussion, though not in the dominant speech, of course. The fact that when combined with the political consignment of past decades, urban social movements and similar international experience, the example of Latin America consists the main reference in the public discussion in Greece, leads in certain cases to a total contestation of the institutions and structures of the market world, such as the economic and administrative dependency on the neighborhoods and regions from designing and implementing organization, as well as the deprivation from inhabitants of the necessary means for the social production and reproduction incurred by the welfare state's construction. On the last map we see some of these forms of struggle, also combined with the places where citizen assemblies take place. We come to the last subject, which discuss three of northern suburb municipalities of Athens. The claiming of these means by the urban social movements, occasional and unorganized for the time being, as far as they aim in answering the dependency mentioned, vis-à-vis self-institutioning and production autonomy on a local scale, may as well allow them to evolve enough to consist the necessary change of example and lead to liberation from the concept that implies the capitalistic neoliberal development to be unavoidable. The necessary condition in order to integrate such a process, which process is objecting to the dominant, not only narration, but also economic and social organization, is to bring forward forms of social and solidarity economy, expanding throughout all three of its sectors. The particular research focuses especially on the western arc of the so-called northern suburbs of Athens, which are Marous, Kalameri, and Kolardos, which composes a convenient field for cohesive analysis and criticism due to its social semblance, its common agricultural past, the development of a similar social identity, as well as a similar capitalistic development pre and post-crisis. Along the neighborhoods of this region, several social practices that attach to the social and solidarity economy appear, deriving straight from the social base: local citizen assemblies, collective cooking and eating, no money fleas and no middlemen commerce, social infirmaries and education, initiative urban cultivation. Such practices tend to open up the conversation frame towards the perspective of social self-institutioning and local emancipation. An essential reason to detain such attempts is their inability to gather in a united and integrated autonomous web, partly due to a lack of a stable theoretical background, and this is just an opinion. We see some aspects of these practices on the slide. And finally, if we wanted to approach an overall conclusion, we could notice that public discussion is gradually enriched with the aspect and practices of the social base of the living and vivid subjects of the city. It is possible that these views and efforts have not achieved a stable marching. They may never operate under a unified plan, yet they still certainly have the power to reinstate the public debate about space to its most actual matters.